And we're back. You're listening to Live from the Heartland. I'm one of your hosts today, Lisa Smith. You were just listening to Katie Hogan, and she was talking to Adam Cater and Martin Quiros about the Interfaith Worker Rights Center and the protest at the Republic Windows and Doors plant. We're sort of continuing to talk about workers and justice and everyday heroes. My next guest is Kim Bobo. Kim is the executive director for the
Interfaith Worker Justice.
Thank you. All right, but now you're the umbrella organization, and Katie was talking to the local.
That's exactly right.
chapter.
We are the national organization of which the Chicago Interfaith and the Workers Center is one of the affiliates from around the country.
Okay.
But we happen to both be here in Chicago.
All right. But now we're not really here. I know that that you all lent support to that. Well, it's not. It wasn't a strike. What do you call it?
A sit-in.
A sit-in. But you're here to talk about a new book that's just been recently published called "Wage Theft in America." It's interesting because you say that it's societal changes in your book. You say societal changes are responsible for an increase in wage theft. If you could just sort of go over briefly what types of wage theft you talk about, that's the most egregious.
Absolutely. Well, a lot of folks say to me, well, Kim, what is wage theft? So wage theft is when an employer illegally steals wages that you are owed. You've worked and you haven't gotten paid either all your wages or you've gotten paid none of your wages. Let me talk about the various ways employers steal. 2 to 3 million workers are not paid the minimum wage, even though they legally are employers are required to pay the minimum wage.
Either by the state or the federal.
That's right. That's right. 3 million workers are misclassified as independent contractors when they're really employees.
Misclassified on purpose.
On purpose. That's right. Well, I assume it's possible some employers don't really understand the law. But, as employers, it's our job to figure out the law, right? We're just saying, oh, we didn't know. I didn't know that I had to pay income taxes. Well, that's not really an adequate excuse, right? You have to pay employees as employees if they really are, which means if you misclassify them as independent contractors, you're stealing from the workers because the worker then is required to pay his or her own payroll taxes, the employer side.
They don't get workers' comp.
They don't get workers' comp. They don't get unemployment, and they don't get any overtime pay if they work hours over 40 hours. So it steals not only from the workers, but it steals from the public coffers as well. So it's fraud against the government. Then there are millions of workers who are classified as employees, but are told that they're not eligible for overtime, even though they are eligible for overtime. So those are sort of the biggest ways. But then there are day laborers who go out, do work, and they don't get paid at all.
Now that's like, I don't understand that. How can that be?
Well, it happens.
How can you go to work for somebody and they say, I'm going to, and that is a sort of a contract gig or for hire.
Yeah, that's right.
You pick somebody up at a parking lot or a whatever, or on the corner and say, come work on this construction site for the day or whatever, and they do the work. You're saying they don't get paid at all?
That's right. Almost every day laborer I've ever talked to has had the experience, not every time, of course, but they've had experiences with people picking them up, having them work all day, and then not paying them. Or if you get fired from a job or you, decide to quit from a job, the employers often won't give you your last paycheck. Now, it doesn't matter whether they've gotten mad at you and fired you. You still have to be paid for the hours that you've worked. Which is why there's so many states that have put in extra laws around requiring that last paycheck, because it's such a common problem for workers. And then one other that's very common is, especially for tipped employees, is that workers don't get all the tips. In fact, there have been major lawsuits against both Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts. Those little cups.
Starbucks too?
Starbucks, right?
The tip jars?
Oh, that the tip jars aren't just going to the workers, that the managers are sharing in those tips. Well, that's illegal. You can't do that.
There was an interesting case a few years back of a very high-end, super ultra chic restaurant here in Chicago where there was a suit brought by the waitstaff against management for exactly such a practice.
Yeah, I mean, it happens all.
They were basically taking a cut.
I was visiting a restaurant down on Argyle Street the other day, and I was gonna go put my bill on the credit card and put the tip on the credit card. But anytime I'm going to do that, I ask the wait staff, "Will you get it?" And I asked I asked the woman. I said, "If I put your tip on the credit card, will you get it?" And she said, "No."
You're kidding.
I said, "Okay, fine." So I put left in cash, of course.
Right.
But again, restaurants are notorious for stealing wages. Every time there have been studies of restaurants by the Department of Labor, they find that half of restaurants are stealing wages from workers, either through the tip stuff, through illegal deductions, through not paying the wait staff, through there's a whole variety of ways it happens. But wage theft it's just rampant in the nation. It's a crisis, and it's a crisis here in Chicago on the north side, right? It's a crisis everywhere. It's
How's
not
that?
somewhere else. It's right around us. You talk to nursing home workers, you talk to restaurant workers, you talk to car wash workers, landscape, the guys that do landscape. 90% of landscapers aren't paid all the wages they're owed. I mean, again, it is just rampant and all around us. So don't think it's somewhere else. It's all around us.
Now, some of the you listed in your book, and we are talking to Kim Bobo and about her book "Wage Theft in America," as if you hadn't picked up on that yet. But one of the things that you mentioned in your book, one of the ways that wages are stolen is exceptions to overtime pay. People not getting paid overtime. But you said under the law, there are some very weird exceptions. People who are not under the law entitled to overtime pay, which some not so weird are salespeople. Teachers, we expect them to put in all that time, and they just get what they get. But you also listed railroad and air carrier employees and movie theater employees. What's up with that?
Well, the exemptions from overtime, most of them really aren't because there's some rational basis. It's really based on the power that an industry had at a given time. So, for example, the one that to me is the most egregious is farm workers. So if you are a farm worker and you're working 70 hours, and this is not easy work, right? And you're probably getting paid $7 an hour or something very modest. You're not eligible for overtime. You mean
under the law?
Under the law, you're not eligible for overtime because farm workers are exempt from overtime. Well, what's the rationale from that? There is no rationale. The only reason it's there is that the business industry, the agricultural industry, had the power to exempt them from overtime. Now, some have actually looked at the categories that are exempt from overtime and view them as kind of a legacy of slavery in our nation.
Wow.
In that if you think about the jobs that were often jobs done by slaves, so field and farm work, house cleaning, home care kind of stuff, well, all of those are categories that are exempt from overtime. So again, it's probably on some level a remnant of slavery.
But what about the railroad? What about the railroad workers?
There's no
understand
explanation that I know of.